Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. It's June 2nd, 2025. This is AMCC's 30-minute national call, same time every Monday, 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central, 9:30 Mountain, 8:30 Pacific. I'm Matt Bogosian, Executive Director of AMCC, the nation's manufacturing community of practice. Our operations director on the controls is David Van Siclen. And we do this call, as you know, at the beginning of every week, goes hand in hand with our AMCC update newsletter that goes out at the end of the week. And like just about everything we do, this two-step every week works because of you, busy professionals across the vast country that want to advance your organizational work by building trusted relationships with others in regions across the country dedicated to similar things, using the best evidence to help make products that we need in ways that strengthen American communities and the national project at the same time. So it's great to have you on. As David suggested, please put your name and affiliation in the chat. Use the chat. Drop stuff, even if we have a presentation today. Sometimes we have a roundtable call where we have more time just for engagement on particular topics. But if you got something hot today, just drop it into the chat. It's a useful tool, as you know, for communicating in these brief 30-minute meetings. AMCC, for those of you that are new, is a free open source network operating for about a decade, dedicated to developing better tactics and structures that help regional public, private, nonprofit partners understand and strengthen their regional manufacturing ecosystem of support, so manufacturers and their communities and the whole nation can make progress. So pretty ambitious, yeah, but it's obvious we need better structures in this country because the ones we have are too slow to keep up with 21st century change, and much less competing with dictators dedicated to dominating the world. So yeah, we need to come together, and that's the good news. We have a lot of important existing ecosystem stakeholders working in the trenches for years and decades, people embedded in regions and in MEPs and SBDCs and IACs, EDDs and labs and institutes and incubators, accelerators, schools, colleges, universities, investor groups, service providers. It's a long, long list. So how do we organize those better into better structures going forward? That's a big project. And so we need a lot of teamwork to help make that happen. This Monday check-in call and the update at the end of the week is a place to gather and share the framework and evidence that's been building, some best practices, and a place to participate and engage and meet and interact. Share your successes and challenges. Like I said, drop things in the chat. Communicate with us by email, by phone, collaborate where you can. Get to know people across regions. That's one of the big takeaways that we've learned over the decade of doing this work, is there's so many stakeholders facing similar challenges just like you are in your own region, and revealing opportunities that are cool best practices that we need to share, like we're going to do today with our presentation. But before we turn to that, I want to encourage you to do more. Right, share the AMCC update. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? At the end of the week, this big AMCC update that's fed with information from you guys, it goes out across the country. Send it to your bosses, your colleagues, your aligned organizations, so that they can benefit from it, so they can share with us cool things that are happening in your neck of the woods that we can elevate. And then we fit that into what's happening on so many fronts, not just this call, but the development of the manufacturing community ecosystem metrics tool and playbook that we have with NIST and so many partners, Deloitte and Argonne National Laboratories. Send that thing around, add value to it if you can, just by sending us a note, and we can elevate cool stuff that's happening in your region. We do other things, as you know. We do AMCC roadshows, which is a way and summits. Like there's the summit, the Manufacturing Momentum Summit, August 5th through 7th in Detroit. Those are all examples of ways to deepen, relationships and share best practices and accelerate the pace of our progress. So anyway, as you know, I could go on, but this is a presentation day. And before we turn it over to another set of great stakeholders, not satisfied with the status quo, to tell us about their work, you also know on this call, we try to, on every call, have a couple of people raise their hand and come on camera, say, if you can, say hello and where you are in the manufacturing ecosystem around the country. So let's do that now. So if you're new to the call, just come on, say hi, where do you work, where you are in the ecosystem of support, where are you, what region or place in the country you are. Or if you haven't done that in a while, chime in and do that. Let's see. David's sending me a note here. So our able operations director. Oh, Chad in Louisiana. I see you're on. Thanks to David. Chad.
Yeah, it's been kind of crazy, but yes, I'm here.
Yeah, tell folks where you are in the world. Yeah.
I am Chad LeCombe. I work for the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. I am the person who is the tech transfer and manage our IP portfolio, including our and industry partnerships.
Great. Thanks, Chad. And how about Mike Roughton in Maine?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
You caught me multitasking. I was listening to your melodious voice and multitasking.
Oh, yeah, listen to you. Yeah.
We're great here in Maine. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. And where are you in the ecosystem in Maine? Yeah.
So the Manufacturers Association of Maine is a member-based nonprofit that supports workforce development largely on one hand these days because of the demands of the manufacturing ecosystem. On the other side, we do a lot of networking with members to help pass along better practices and generally support everything everybody needs to try and profitably grow their businesses.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you. All right. So we could go on and on, of course, because we have a lot of stakeholders, but we just like to do that every week. That was something that we learned from you guys. Let's do that. Let's keep in touch. Let's build those relationships, share, get to know each other on the chat. That's a good thing. But today, it is a presentation day. We need strong leaders trying to not only strengthen their region but also share what they're learning and know-how across regions. We need that regional leadership, and nonprofits are oftentimes in regions the key to being the connective tissue, bringing fragmented stakeholders together. But nonprofits need money, right, to operate. Money comes through grants often, but lots of regions are not really set up that effectively to collaborate and get those grants. So let me introduce you, finally, Anna, with all that warm up there. Hannah Conover, Executive Director of Grant Ready Kentucky, and Zach Matheson on our team. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's great to be here. If it's okay, I'm going to try to share my screen now. We'll see if the technology is going to play with us today.
Yeah.
All right, can you all see that?
Sure can.
Perfect. So I have some slides to run through today, and I'm going to run through them really fast because I know we don't have a lot of time together. But essentially, Grant Ready Kentucky is a nonprofit organization that my co-founder and I started in late 2022. And really, it's all about funding access, especially for economically distressed communities and rural communities, and making sure that they have what they need to be investable places to expand their economies, to move away from mono economies in a lot of cases. And before doing this, I was actually in the finance sector. I'm a CPA. And so I sort of got a lot of firsthand look at how this works in the for-profit sector before jumping into the nonprofit sector. And one of the first things we did was spend about 2 years just talking to folks in Kentucky, meeting with economic development professionals, meeting with the nonprofits that lead transformative projects around the state, and just trying to find out what their barriers to improving their communities were, what their barriers to funding access was. And this really sort of came to a head around the 2020 to 2022 time period, because as we all know, there was a lot of federal funding launching at that time, about $3 trillion in competitive funding from, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill and the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. But what we were finding when we were talking to folks, especially in rural communities, is they were not as excited about those funding opportunities as we were. And it was simply because there were too many barriers for those communities to actually access the funding. And this Philanthropies Rural Blind Spot came out in 2022. In this study, this particular quote really stuck out to me, that the most economically distressed places, so the places where we really want to put funding, they're actually the least likely to apply for it and the least likely to get it. And so that was sort of lining up with what we were hearing from communities on the ground. And so we started to dig into this a little bit more and look at both private foundation funding as well as federal sector funding. And we found that what we were being told by our rural communities was, played out in the actual quantitative data as well. So you can see here, there's been a number of studies that have found that private foundations predominantly fund on the coasts, which means our middle America communities are doing a lot more with a lot less. So the way that plays out in Kentucky, but you can see on this map, it's true for a lot of other southern communities as well, that, on a national average, foundations are granting about 100 per person. But when you dig down into the numbers for rural or southern communities, that drops to about a third of that number. Then when we looked at the federal side of things, we realized that this graphic from the Brookings Institution sort of shows the tangled web of the federal funding and grant system, and that this is a really confusing place to throw nonprofits or small rural communities into to try to figure out how to, advance their economies and bring investment to their communities. But one of the biggest barriers that we were being told on the ground and that we could see when we did this research was that a lot of federal grants require that cash match component, which is often 20 to 50% of the project costs. And so that makes sense in theory. We do, federal grants are public dollars and we want them to be spent well, and want people to have skin in the game. But what we were seeing was cities with entire budgets of perhaps less than $2 million a year coming up with a match, 50% match on a $10 million project is just simply impossible. And so a lot of these projects that would make these communities investable places, those projects were just being cut off at the knees in the very beginning of getting started. So we started to realize, okay, this isn't a uniquely Kentucky problem. And we started to look around the state, around the nation to find out what other states were doing to address this problem as we were seeing this sort of fire hose of federal funding in a short period of time. And what we found from other states when we researched this in 2022 was that a few states, notably Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, were piloting pools of funding at the state level that communities, city, county governments, nonprofits could access as they go along and as they apply for a federal grant. We also saw a lot of success from states that helped communities apply for funding, helped them with the technical assistance piece, helped them write the often technical 150-page grant applications, and then states that did more towards building rural capacity to develop projects from the beginning. And so we took inspiration from what we were seeing as best practices around the nation and started up our organization, which we originally started with just training. So our idea initially was to address that technical assistance piece. And when we did our first trainings around the state, we found that people were driving 3 hours one way just to learn about grant writing and get training and get skilled up. And so we had mayors coming, we had community developers coming, And we realized that there was more to this work than just the technical assistance piece. And so as we were training people across the state, we were also surveying them. What are your barriers to accessing federal funds? What are your barriers to community development? And so we collected a lot of great data, both on the ground and at the national level. And we very quickly went from just a technical assistance organization to also a policy and advocacy organization, because we were able to take all of the data that we had gathered to our state capitol within 3 months of launching our organization and just sort of lay out that as a state, we were leaving a lot of funding on the table because our largest communities, our Lexingtons and our Louisvilles, had the capacity to apply and win funding, but our smallest communities that arguably needed the funding the most did not. And so we were successful in 2023 in asking the state of Kentucky to set up a very, very small pilot program to help communities match federal investment. And so in 2023, that launched the creation of the Kentucky Grant Program, which is one of those, governments love acronyms. So it stands for Government Resources Accelerating Needed Transformation. And we were able to prove in that first year, there was over $100 million in applications for that $2 million in funding in 4 months. And then once that $2 million was committed, the state saw an 8-to-1 return on their investment. So every dollar that the state put in, they were seeing $8 come back from federal grants and other public-private partnership investments. And so in last year, we were successful in going back to the legislature in the Kentucky budget session and actually expanded that $2 million pool to a $200 million pool, which at the time was the largest grant match pool in the nation. And along that same time period, we have been spending time all around the state, educating folks, providing hands-on grant writing assistance, sometimes paying to bring in a grant writing consultant on behalf of communities, and making sure that they have access to the resources they need to actually go after that funding. And then in the last legislative session this year, that just passed this last March, we got some administrative changes to the legislation. We expanded access. Now all 120 counties are able to access this match pool with some additional prioritization around rural and economically distressed communities. And so what we've seen so far has been tremendously impactful from this program. So far of the 200 million, about 100 million has been committed, and that will be leveraging $500 million in community projects. And you can see that that's brought to fruition over 200 projects across the state of Kentucky, and many of them are in Eastern Kentucky, where we suspected there was a pent-up demand for project development. And so to sort of close out, I know we don't have a lot of time to talk today, but one of the things that we've been doing since January is we launched a coalition, a community of practice of other states, other nonprofits at the state level who are working on this capacity issue, who are working on funding access, especially for economically distressed and rural communities. And so far we have 10 states that are joining monthly to talk about best practices, to talk about common barriers. We have found that, Eastern Kentucky, rural Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia, it's very similar to tribal communities in New Mexico. It's very similar to rural communities in Wyoming. So we have a lot more in common than we have, apart. And so we are trying to grow this coalition of state agencies and state level nonprofits who meet monthly and just try to work together to, help communities seek, secure, and manage braided funding strategies so that they can build, sustainable economic and community development. You can see on this sort of draft image that we are no longer the largest match pool in the nation. If we look at Massachusetts, they recently put a $750 million match pool together, and that also includes support for things like accessing energy tax credits and some broadens it out, not just federal grant opportunities. So if you don't see your state represented on here, please and let us know. We would love to add more states to this group. We think right now it's especially important that we have a unified voice around federal grant access and are able to lift up the stories of why some of these programs are so important and why they're disproportionately important for rural and economically distressed communities. So I will stop there. This is my contact information. If any of you would like to get in touch with me after the call, I'd love to have a chat with you and talk about funding access.
Hey, Hannah, that's great. I just dropped in the chat the Recompete program, and I was wondering how, if at all, your Forge, group that's emerging and sounds like it's going to be growing after this call, how, if at all, that interacts with Recompete. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're having our next call this week, actually. So we probably will be talking about some of that. Our calls so far have been trying to, it's been a lot of working through a lot of the federal administration changes together and just talking about what are you hearing? How are you responding to this? Things like that. Recompete, we did have a large Recompete winner here in Kentucky through the SOAR. So that was a $50 million project. So we do have a lot of, especially across Appalachia, strong partnerships there.
Yeah, that's great. And and Zach dropped both of your email and his own email in the chat. So if people want to grab that, Jen Cash in Washington asked about that. And then Joe Meyer has a question about where can we find the map of investments by county you showed in the first couple of slides? Absolutely.
So if you go to ced.ky.gov/grant, I believe it is, help me confirm that, Zach. One of the things that we worked on the legislation was to be very transparent as to where the funding was going. So the Cabinet for Economic Development here in Kentucky administers that $200 million pool. And if you go to their website at the bottom of that site, every month they are sharing the projects that were approved, what they do, where they are, how much funding was committed, and all of those details.
That's great, Hannah. Now tell me, what was the genesis of this Forge idea? Because that's super cool. I mean, that's kind of the ethos of what we've been doing for 10 years. Like, hey, when something's working in one area, let's share it quickly, right? Because,
Yes.
back to this whole, we're competing with dictators in the 21st century with new technologies that's super fast, and we're going to have to operate quickly in our fragmented, albeit great democratic system. Yeah.
Right. Well, so it's actually interesting. As I said, Kentucky was not the only state struggling with this issue. So there's an organization called the Grant Plant out of New Mexico, and they had a private funder who asked them to specifically research this issue, federal funding access and leveraging and access for rural communities. And so they actually went around and interviewed every state that was working on this problem, including us. And so the map that I showed of states that had match pools, that came from the Grant Plant. And so Tanya and I, she's the lead researcher at the Grant Plant, we realized that there was a lot of commonalities in the barriers across states, and there was a lot of commonalities in the solutions, except we were all sort of individually building the plane as we flew it. And so she suggested that we start bringing, those initial 15 states that had match pools together. But now we're realizing, let's pull as many states together as we can, because there's power in a unified policy voice. And I think that, all of us have stories of how impactful some of these programs are on rural communities. And so this year we are spending a lot of time trying to bring those stories to light. So that, if there are programs that are sort of up on the chopping block, we can show why that might not be, even from an economic standpoint, it might not be a good idea.
Yeah, thanks for that. At some point, it might be good for us to connect with Tanya too.
Yes, absolutely. I think Zach's dropping her research in the chat.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, thank you.
I just
Please go
wanted
ahead,
to
Zach.
add, yeah, I just wanted to add that, yeah, like Hannah said, we are capturing these success stories about these programs that are helping other programs across states. And yeah, if you are at the state level and you're supporting your nonprofits or manufacturers with something like what Hannah described today, we'd love to talk to you, maybe capture your stories.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Any questions for Hannah or Zach? We have a couple of minutes left. Take your time. Someone can come off camera and ask a question.
Hi, I'm trying to come off camera. This is Jen Cash. Hi. This is wonderful. This is amazing. Thanks for sharing your story. How do you, I'll dig into your website and learn a bunch more, but one of the things, and I noticed Washington State was on that map, and we do have matching programs, but in my view, what we need to work towards building is more of that systematic or that process behind the grant. Like there's no just standard or best practices or how do you provide, or how do you provide that layer of guidance? It's almost, and we're developing a nuclear ecosystem between Washington and Idaho, which is very hard to do. But I noticed you really need just somebody kind of on the outside with maybe more of a grander vision, and then those people on the ground in the communities. So how do you make that work? And I know like we don't have much time remaining, but would love to hear your thoughts.
So one of the things that we advocated for, in addition to the match, is that the match is like the biggest and first barrier, right? But if we only address that, then it's just going to be, in Kentucky, it's called the Golden Triangle: Cincinnati, Louisville, Lexington. It's going to be the same people, right? And so we also secured a $4 million appropriation in the last state budget to specifically work on technical assistance pieces. And so look, if you go on our website and you're a nonprofit or you're a city or you're a county and you're thinking about a project, you can book a call with one of our experts for free within the week. And so we felt like access to that technical assistance was equally important. And what we have found, so we had budgeted that we thought, okay, we're going to take folks from start to finish, right? From start to finish with a project and a grant. What we have found is that more folks need 5 to 10 hours of expert assistance, and then they're off to the races. And so that's even been surprising to us that folks need self-confidence building. They need to feel like they have an expert beside them as they try to, navigate things they've maybe never navigated before. And so we can be that sort of source of support. And even if they're coming to us with other questions, like I need a feasibility study, or I need help figuring out this direct pay stuff, tax credits, like we are connected in enough with the rest of the state organizations that we can, if we can't help them directly, we can often refer them to someone who can help them. And often that's subsidized because it's through our university systems, or it's through other systems that are set up in the state. But a lot of times folks don't even know those resources exist. And so we are kind of the conduit, not just to technical assistance for grant writing, but for other types of technical assistance that folks may not be aware of.
Yeah, Jen, I just add
Go
real
ahead.
quick that I worked in public health for a while, and it feels like sort of like wraparound social services where people will come to our workshop and then they'll go off and they'll come back and maybe they'll get help with like a boot camp where we train them up to get grant ready. And then maybe they'll leverage this match pool to get these federal funds. And they're all sort of like somewhere in our ecosystem a couple times maybe.
And I'll just add to that one last thing, is that part of our trainings, we are dragging, I say dragging, but they're very happy to come along. They're dragging the Cabinet for Economic Development all around the state, from Whitesburg to Paducah to the smallest areas of the state. And I think even they would say it's been helpful for them to find out the projects that are happening in more rural parts of the state that maybe they didn't even know existed. So it's been sort of breaking down those silos of information on both sides.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's good hard work, Hannah. Thank you, and Zach, for sharing that Grant Ready Kentucky and this Forge network across the country. I can see that really blooming. So we're at the top of the hour. So we keep these things really short because we know you're busy and have a big week ahead of you, as we do, and everybody working together. So looking forward to engaging with you throughout the week. We'll see you next Monday. Look for the AMCC update, share it, and we'll see you. Take good care. See you next week.